We know Maximilien Robespierre as the face of the terror, cold, calculating, the man who sent thousands to the guillotine. But what about his final day? What happens when the executioner becomes the condemned? These were 24 hours that flipped the French Revolution upside down, a single day, when the most feared man in France became the hunted. If you value carefully sourced history like this, make sure to subscribe. It is the best way to support our work and let us know which city you are listening from. This script is based on reliable research using original convention records and the official Courtois report. Now back to the story. It is July 27th, 1794. At 9:00 a.m., the hall of the National Convention hums with tension as Robespierre climbs to the rostrum. He carries with him a speech, 2 hours of paranoid wandering about enemies and plots. Yet something is different this time. His voice cracks. His hands tremble. The man who never once showed weakness now seems to be coming apart in front of 800 deputies. There is a conspiracy against public liberty, he declares. But crucially, he will not name names. He refuses to say who these conspirators are. It is a fatal mistake. Every deputy in the chamber hears his own death sentence between the lines. The speech drags on endlessly. Robespierre talks of virtue and corruption, of enemies in the shadows, his usual themes, but it skips and stutters like a broken record. Deputies shift uncomfortably in their seats. Whispered conversations ripple through the benches. This is no longer the controlled orator they fear. This is a man unraveling before their eyes. By 11:30 a.m., the speech ends to only scattered claps. On a normal day, the chamber would have erupted in thunderous applause for Robespierre, but today the silence cuts like a blade. One by one, deputies rise to tear him apart. Tallien calls him a dictator. Below Varenne accuses him of tyranny. The incorruptible is being destroyed by his own allies. Betrayal, once close to him, delivers the coup de grace. The accuser of all now stands accused himself. The chamber explodes in approval. Robespierre's power base collapses in real time. Men who had followed him through months of blood suddenly find their courage. At noon, Robespierre tries to reply, but his voice fails him. He literally cannot speak. The man whose words once sent thousands to their deaths now finds none of his own. "Down with the tyrant" roars across the hall. The convention votes, and in an overwhelming majority, Robespierre, his brother Augustin, and 3 close allies are arrested. Only a few scattered protests rise from the most devoted Jacobins. Saint-Just attempts to defend him, but his words are drowned in a wave of fury. Couthon, paralyzed in his wheelchair, begs for mercy. No one listens. The inner circle of the terror has just become its newest victims. By 2:00 p.m., Paris's commune hears the news. These are Robespierre's people, the municipal government that controls the streets. They refuse to recognize the arrest order. Instead, they dispatch armed men to snatch him from the Committee of General Security. A civil war brews in the heart of Paris. The rescue comes quickly. Commune troops storm the building on the Rue Honoré, overrun the guards, and free Robespierre and his allies before the convention can react. But a question remains. Where do you hide the most recognizable face in France? At 3:30 p.m., they take him to City Hall, the Hôtel de Ville, which instantly becomes both a fortress and a trap. Commune officials barricade the doors and post guards at every entry, yet the building stands exposed in the center of Paris. There are no escape routes, no back door to safety. By 5 p.m., Robespierre sits in a shabby office inside City Hall, surrounded by perhaps 200 National Guardsmen still loyal to the Commune. Outside, the convention's forces mobilize. Thousands of troops march, cannon wheels thundering over the cobblestones. The man who once wielded absolute power now relies on an improvised militia. His followers beg him to flee Paris. Boats wait on the Seine, horses stand ready at the city gates. But Robespierre freezes. He cannot decide. The revolutionary who reshaped France sits paralyzed while his world collapses. At 6:30 p.m., the convention's forces encircle City Hall. General Barras commands perhaps 6,000 men. Artillery pieces are aimed directly at the main doors, yet the gunners hesitate, for inside lie invaluable revolutionary records. 5 years of upheaval on paper. One stray cannonball could erase history. By 7:15 p.m., François Henriot arrives, the commander of the Paris National Guard, Robespierre's most violent supporter, and the man who had cleared the convention with cannons just a year earlier during the purge of the Girondins. If anyone can save the incorruptible, it is Henriot, but he staggers in blind drunk at the worst possible moment. His troops look at their commander and lose faith. Some slip away into the alleys of Paris, others switch sides outright. The Commune's military force bleeds away hour by hour. At 8:30 p.m., the convention outlaws Robespierre through an ancient legal mechanism that means instant death. No trial, no delay, anyone may kill him on sight. The very law he once wielded to crush his enemies now points at his own throat. Town criers shout the decree through the districts. Handbills plaster the walls of Paris. 15,000 livres offered for his head, dead or alive. The city becomes a hunting ground, and Robespierre is the prey. By 10:00 p.m., the first defections hit City Hall. Commune councillors slip out of side doors. Men who swore loyalty only hours earlier now fear for their lives. The building empties section by section. Guards abandon their posts. Clerks vanish with their ledgers. The fortress begins to rot from within. At 10:30 p.m., Robespierre takes up pen and paper. His hands shake as he scrawls his final letters, messages to his sister Charlotte, instructions for the care of his dog. Blunt, mundane details, written by a man who knows the end has already arrived. He signs each letter with his full name and title, as though power still flows from his pen. His brother Augustin paces like a caged animal. Saint-Just sits silent in the corner, staring into the shadows. Couthon prays from his chair, whispering words to a god who offers no reply. Lebas methodically cleans his pistol. Every motion deliberates. 5 men who once controlled France now sit in a cramped office, waiting for death. By 12:15 a.m. the convention's troops storm City Hall. Gunfire rips through the corridors. Robespierre hides in a small committee room with perhaps 20 diehards. Desks and chairs are stacked into barricades, but such makeshift defenses cannot stop musket fire, let alone cannon. The sound of the assault rolls through the empty halls. Musket volleys, screams, boots, hammering marble floors. The attack comes from 3 directions at once. The Commune's defenders fire a few desperate rounds before scattering. There is no discipline, no leadership, no hope. Midnight slips into July 28th. The final hours, at 1:00 a.m., Lebas raises his pistol and pulls the trigger. Better to die by his own hand than be taken by the enemy. His body collapses across a mound of papers. Blood soaks revolutionary proclamations and death warrants alike. The first of the inner circle falls. By 1:15 a.m., the doors splinter. Soldiers burst into the room. Robespierre sits at a table, head in his hands. Accounts differ on what happens next. Some say he tried to shoot himself and the pistol misfired, shattering his jaw. Others claim a soldier's bullet struck him. Either way, the incorruptible is left bleeding out on the floor. The most likely truth is a botched suicide. Robespierre was never skilled with weapons. He lived by words, not by guns. The pistol kicked back in his inexperienced grip, tearing through his lower jaw instead of his brain. Alive but ruined, Augustin Robespierre hurls himself from a window, shattering both legs, but surviving. Couthon, helpless in his paralysis, is dragged down the stairs like a broken doll. Saint-Just surrenders without a fight. The Terror's inner circle collapses in 15 minutes of chaos and violence. At 2:30 a.m., they carry Robespierre on a stretcher through the streets of Paris. Blood seeps through makeshift bandages, his jaw hanging loose, his breathing labored and wet. The man who once drove France into revolution now clings desperately to life. Crowds gather to spit, curse, and throw stones. The bearers push through narrow alleys as Parisians pour from their homes in the dead of night. News travels like fire. Robespierre has fallen. The tyrant bleeds like any other man. Citizens who hid in silence for months suddenly find their courage in the dark. At dawn, July 28th, they haul him into the Committee of Public Safety, his own office, where he had signed countless death orders. Now he is the condemned. His jaw is wrapped in dingy cloth, one eye swollen shut, his breathing ragged through froth and blood. The man who spoke of virtue and terror is now reduced to silence, awaiting judgment. The irony throbs in the air. This is the very room where Robespierre once planned the expansion of the terror, where he marked names for death, where he reviewed execution lists with his morning coffee. His desk still holds his papers, and his signature lingers on dozens of death warrants. Now the architect of fear sits broken in the same chamber, awaiting the justice he so often signed into being. By 8 a.m., Paris wakes to chaos. Crowds knot on every corner. News runs like gunpowder through the courtiers. Robespierre is captured. The leader of the terror has fallen. People dance in the streets and sing songs that had been forbidden for years. Hidden bottles of wine are pulled from cupboards. Bakers open their shops early, and merchants lift their shutters. Citizens emerge from fear like moles blinking into sunlight. Yet the celebration feels fragile, brittle, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the spell. At 10:30 a.m. comes the trial that is not a trial. Fouquier Tinville, the public prosecutor, reviews the case, but outlawry leaves no room for defense, no witnesses, no appeals, only verification of identity and a sentence of death. The same legal machinery that condemned thousands now turns in reverse. Robespierre cannot speak to defend himself. His jaw is a ruin. He tries to scratch out notes with trembling hands, but Fouquier barely glances at them. Revolutionary justice moves quickly when the architect of the terror stands in the dock. By noon, the tumbril arrives, the same wooden cart that once carried Marie Antoinette and thousands of others to the scaffold. Robespierre is loaded like freight. He cannot sit upright. He braces himself against the side rails. The executioner's assistant helps him, almost gently, a professional courtesy between men who deal in death. Yet even that touch reveals how frail Robespierre has become. He weighs less than expected. Months of strain have hollowed him out. The terror consumed its maker from within. The crowd is colossal, the largest gathering in years. Everyone wants to see the fall of the man who once terrified them. Women scream curses, men wave bloody rags, children hurl trash into the cart. The procession creeps through Paris like a carnival of hate. Death to the tyrant, down with the dictator. Voices rise from every window and threshold. This is the same crowd that once cheered his speeches. Now they want his blood more than bread. The cartwheels shriek over the cobblestones. Each jolt sends a fresh shock of agony through his shattered jaw. Robespierre keeps his eyes closed. Perhaps he is unconscious, perhaps ashamed. The man who once fed on public adoration now faces its fury. At 12:30 p.m. the procession rolls past the Rue Saint-Honoré, past the modest lodgings where Robespierre had lived for 4 years, where he wrote his speeches and plotted purges. Someone flings a pail of pig's blood against the windows, red streaks trickling down like tears. The landlord peeks from behind a curtain. Duplay, the carpenter, who had once treated Robespierre like a son and given him shelter. Revolutionary friendship fades quickly when the guillotine calls. By 1:07 p.m., the revolution devours itself. The crowd thickens to a crushing density, perhaps 20,000 bodies packed along the route, pressing forward to witness the end. Vendors hawk food and drink. Pickpockets slip through the tight press of bodies. Death, as always, draws trade the way honey draws flies. By 2:30 p.m., the Place de la Révolution comes into view. The guillotine waits, the very machine Robespierre helped perfect, the symbol of his reign. The mob surges around the scaffold, 15,000 throats baying for blood. They drag him up the steps. Executioner Sanson tears the bandage from his shattered jaw. Robespierre lets out a sound like a dying animal, a raw, tearing shriek that cuts through the roar of the mob. Then silence. Perfect, icy silence, as his head settles into the lunette. The assistants move with practiced efficiency. One pins his shoulders, another secures his legs. Sanson checks the mechanism one last time, the same ritual he has performed 1,000 times before. Robespierre's eyes open, clear for the first time in hours. He sees the crowd, the blood-stained platform, the poised blade. Understanding floods his face. At last the architect of the terror comprehends his position inside the machine he built. The blade falls. The crowd explodes. Paris detonates with joy. Sanson lifts the severed head high, and the city loses its mind. People dance in the streets. Wine pours like water. Church bells ring for the first time since the terror began. Blood pools in the straw, the same straw that has soaked up the lives of thousands of his victims. The guillotine has claimed its most famous meal. The man who fed it now feeds it one final time. By 3:15 p.m., the cleanup begins. Bodies are loaded onto carts. Augustin Robespierre, Saint-Just, Couthal. 22 men in all die beneath the afternoon sun. The leadership of the terror is erased in a single scorching session. Paris celebrates their demise until long past midnight. But the story does not end at the scaffold. While the crowds revel, citizens swarm Robespierre's lodgings on the Rue Saint-Honoré. They pick through his possessions like carrion birds, searching for souvenirs, for secrets. What they find shocks even hardened revolutionaries. The first discovery is the famous green coat, the one he wore during every major speech, hanging neatly in his wardrobe while Paris bled. People tear it to pieces for keepsakes. Everyone wants a fragment of the tyrant's garment. The coat that once terrorized France is reduced to tatters, a tourist trinket passed from hand to hand. By 5:30 p.m., the true treasure hunt begins. Revolutionary officials seal the apartment and begin cataloguing Robespierre's belongings for confiscation by the state. Standard procedure after an execution, but this inventory reveals the man behind the monster. Books, hundreds of them, line the shelves. Volumes of philosophy, law, and poetry. Rousseau's works in full, their margins crowded with Robespierre's careful annotations. Texts on Roman virtue and the ideals of the ancient republics. The tyrant's inner world emerges, mapped in underlines and dog-ears. At 6:15 p.m., the final record begins to take shape. Not only the belongings of a man, but the remnants of a mind that once believed it could shape France through virtue and terror. They find his dog, Brunt, locked in a back room, half-starved and whining at the door. The irony is painful. The man who spared no mercy for human beings had hand-fed his pet every morning with quiet devotion. Now, with its master gone, the animal trembles in the dark, waiting for a kindness that will never return. Officials gather to argue over the fate of a dictator's dog. Some suggest execution, as if the animal bore guilt for its owner's crimes. Others laugh at the absurdity of killing a starving pet to prove revolutionary zeal. In the end, a street sweeper, a man of no power and no office, steps forward. He adopts the animal and takes him home that very night. Brunt vanishes into obscurity, slipping into quiet anonymity. In the end, the dog becomes the only living creature to mourn Robespierre. By 8:15 p.m., private papers begin to surface. The officials comb carefully through drawers and boxes, pulling out letters from his sister Charlotte, ordinary notes that speak of family bonds, untouched by the storm of politics. There are shopping lists for household supplies, small reminders of daily life, candles, bread, paper, ink. His personal accounts show careful spending, revealing a man who lived with restraint. The public monster, the figure who dominated France with terror, had lived like a middling clerk. His meals were modest, his furniture plain, his home free of luxuries, except for books. But deeper inside the drawers, the investigators uncover far more disturbing evidence. Correspondence with provincial officials emerges, reports from local representatives, and a sprawling network of surveillance. Every district, every influential citizen, every corner of France seemed to fall under his watch. The incorruptible, as he was called, kept eyes on everything. The terror had not just been public trials and guillotines. It had been a system of constant, invisible scrutiny, where no one was safe from suspicion. At 8:30 p.m., the discovery that shocks the room comes to light. Citizen Courtois, the official appointed to investigate Robespierre's papers, locates a secret drawer built into the desk itself. The compartment is invisible unless you know precisely where to press. Inside it lies a collection of documents that rewrite the meaning of the final act of Robespierre's story. Among them is the infamous list, 13 names written in Robespierre's meticulous hand, each one marked for immediate arrest and execution. The purge was scheduled for July 30th, just 3 days after his fall. It would have been so vast, so consuming, that it threatened to eclipse everything that had come before. The list is divided into sections, each one more shocking than the last. Section 1 contains the moderates, those who had quietly questioned the pace of the terror. Men like Bassy, Donglas and Louis appear here, survivors of the earlier Girondin purge, who had learned to keep their heads down. Their silence had not saved them from Robespierre's suspicion. Section 2 reveals something darker still. The names of his own allies. Cold-blooded betrayals lie in ink, friends and supporters marked for death. Without hesitation, Collot d'Herbois, who had helped steer the terror, Bilot Viavian, who had backed Robespierre in every crisis, even Barrère, his master of propaganda, is on the list. The revolution was preparing to eat itself from the head down. Section 3 is the most devastating of all. It contains administrators, mayors, judges, generals, the very machinery of the government, men who had faithfully carried out his orders. At the top of this section sits the name of Fouquier Tinville, the prosecutor who had condemned thousands to the guillotine. Now even he was slated for his own appointment with the blade. In Robespierre's world, loyalty meant nothing. Paranoia ruled, and suspicion spared no one. By 9:15 p.m., more papers come to light. Drafts of speeches, carefully composed, primed to sway public opinion in preparation for the mega-purge. His words paint the same familiar picture: France corrupted by foreign cabals, Austrian gold buying the loyalty of patriots, British agents gnawing at the heart of revolutionary virtue. These were the same accusations that had justified past massacres, but this time the scale was staggering. Entire sections of government were marked for eradication. Military commanders were set to be replaced overnight. Provincial administrations would be swept clean in one decisive stroke. The full meaning becomes clear. Within days, France would have awoken either under Robespierre's personal dictatorship or collapsed into civil war. His fall, sudden and brutal, had not merely ended a tyrant's life. It had prevented the obliteration of a nation. 10 p.m. The day that began with his capture now closes with the revelation of just how much more destruction he had planned. The terror's architect was gone, but the shadow of his ambitions still lingered in the ink of his hand and the blood of his victims. They open his private journal and find daily entries from the last 6 months, paranoid ramblings about enemies and plots. Everyone is suspect, everyone hiding royalist sympathies. The preacher of virtue sees corruption everywhere. June entries speak of sleepless nights, constant fear of assassination, checking the locks 3 times before bed. The leader of the terror lived terrified by his own creation. Revolutionary justice could strike anyone, even him. The July pages grow frantic and desperate. Wild theories about deputy conspiracies, plans to denounce half the convention. The final entry bears the date July 26th. Tomorrow I will tell the truth that virtue may triumph or I will die. A man walking a razor's edge, resolved to cleanse France with blood or be swallowed by it. Midnight approaches. Paris still sings in the streets. Wine gushes from public fountains, and citizens belt out forbidden songs. The end of the terror feels like a national exhale. But by candlelight, the investigators keep working, unearthing plans that would have made everything worse. The picture forming on the table is stark. This was no drift into random slaughter. It was architecture, careful, methodical, scheduled violence, a mechanism prepared to strip the Republic to the studs and rebuild it around a single will. If the gunshot at City Hall had found his brain instead of his jaw, if the convention's assault had been 20 minutes later, France would have woken into a nightmare, and the papers are not done talking. By 7 a.m. on July 29th, the investigators have pieced together the full picture from Robespierre's seized documents. This was no improvisation, no rash paranoia scribbled in the margins. He had drafted a systematic elimination of France's leadership, not random arrests, not piecemeal killings, but a complete gutting of the Republic. Every institution was to be hollowed out at once, every leader marked for the blade. The government of France, as it stood, was to be swept away and replaced by the dictatorship of one man. Among the papers are military orders signed and ready, arrest warrants for a dozen generals, men who had won victories against foreign invaders, now condemned as traitors. If carried out, the French army would wake leaderless and vulnerable. Foreign forces, massed on the borders, would march into chaos. By 2:30 a.m., and letters from provincial officials reveal the broader scheme: instructions in code, orders to prepare lists of suspicious citizens, commands to ready guillotines for mass executions. The terror would spread beyond Paris to every town square. Cities already punished brutally for revolt would face worse: total depopulation, buildings razed, survivors scattered. The city itself was to be erased from the map. Revolutionary justice without restraint, vengeance written into policy. By 4:05 a.m., financial papers exposed another collapse. France was bankrupt, bled dry by war abroad and repression at home. Tax collection faltered as administrators feared for their lives. The Republic hemorrhaged money faster than it could print. Assignees. Robespierre's solution was brutal and simple: confiscate more property from the condemned. Fund the government with legalized theft. Each execution would swell the treasury. Death itself had become economic policy. At 4:15 a.m., the personal letters cut deeper than any decree. His sister Charlotte pleaded for the violence to stop. His brother Augustin wrote of private doubts, even within the circle of the terror. Voices questioned the endless blood. Yet Robespierre grew more isolated, and isolation only hardened him. Later drafts of his writings showed a man resolved. If others faltered, he alone would act. Virtue required sacrifice. France must be purified in blood. The incorruptible had become utterly unbending. Dawn broke on July 29th. 24 hours had passed since his arrest. Paris counted its dead and hunted for meaning. The terror had already taken 17,000 lives in just 14 months, yet the papers suggested something worse still to come. At 5:30 a.m., the final inventory of his possessions was taken. His personal wealth amounted to just 73 livres, less than a skilled artisan earned in a year. The man who had controlled France's treasury lived poorer than many of his victims. Power without profit, destruction without enrichment. His most valuable belongings were not jewels or gold, but law books inherited from his father, revolutionary medals awarded by committees, and a silver watch gifted by grateful citizens after his early speeches. These were the material remains of a life chained to abstract ideals. By 7:15 a.m., the investigators finished their task. Hundreds of documents were sealed and catalogued, evidence of a plan that would have destroyed what remained of revolutionary France. The files vanished into government archives, not to resurface for decades, but whispers spread quickly in political circles. Deputies who had survived by mere hours, generals saved by chance, realized how close France had come to the abyss. The nation had stepped back from the brink by pure accident, a misfired pistol and 20 minutes of combat. At 7:30 a.m., the wider truth sank in. Robespierre's death had not ended the terror through popular revolt or a decisive military coup. It ended by chance. Sheer luck had prevented the final purge. One failed suicide attempt, a brief delay in the storming of City Hall. Without those, France would have descended into mass slaughter, political collapse, and foreign conquest. The revolution would have burned itself alive. 3 days later, investigators unlocked one last secret. Hidden in his desk were architectural plans to expand the guillotine's operation, multiple execution sites across Paris. The terror had been designed to grow larger still, spreading its machinery of death until no corner of the Republic remained untouched. Steam-driven blades for faster killing industrialized death on a scale the world had never seen. The man who once preached virtue had prepared to mechanize terror itself, turning judgment into factory work and execution into an engineered process. If you value historically documented stories like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work and tell us which city you're watching from. This script is based on Courtois' official report and the National Archives, bringing the final hours of Robespierre back